Welcome to the fuck it. Hi, this is the Bad Vibes Club podcast. It's Matt. This is the second of 3 podcasts with Andrea Francke. In this podcast, we talk about The Idiot by Elif Bautman, which is a wonderful novel and you should go and read it immediately. If you haven't heard the last podcast where we talk about Chinese sci-fi, you should go back and listen to that. And the next podcast will be out in a week or so, and it will be the final conversation with Andrea, and we'll be talking about post-truth and paranoid reading. Okay, enjoy. Okay, so we're reading Elif Bautman's The Idiot today. Why are we reading that?
So I've been thinking about it because I've never felt more defensive about a cultural object before. I wrote all my notes were like defensive justifications. Why did I decide to read it? Why did I continue reading it? Why did I try to convince people? And I was trying to pinpoint why I feel so awkward about this. And I think when I started reading, and we can go through my list of defense points of why I started reading it. I read the first 10 or 15 pages and I just felt so stupid. And I was like, why am I reading this chick lit weird thing about this 19-year-old girl going through college and having crushes and doing all this stuff? And I felt so, I judged myself. And then I kept going, and I think it's actually an amazing literary novel. And it's I don't think it's, I think there are lots of interesting stuff about it, but I think it kind of stayed with me how suspicious I was to read something that had that type of protagonist and that type of voice and take it seriously. And I think it got to me because she's really smart, and I think she's taking a stand in making those decisions. But I sort of do the same thing in my work, not as smartest, and maybe not, maybe I don't feel that much in control, but I have the same, I feel like a lot of people have the same reaction to my work that goes around ideas of motherhood and reproduction and stuff. So I do these things where I'll be in a place and I'm talking about Piracy Project, and I have this very varied group of people listen to it. And then I, for some reason, move to talk about reproduction and childcare, and 90% of the men will get up and leave with absolutely no guilt or whatever. They're just this is clearly not for me.
Yeah. Because the Piracy Project is this project where you've been looking at forms of book piracy mostly, right?
Yeah, so we talk about copyright and authorship.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because to me, the two projects, or another projects that I do are quite similar. I do them in the same way. And to me, the philosophical questions, the political questions are exactly the same.
Yeah.
But clearly, one theme is considered universal and appropriate as an art subject, and everybody's included. And the other one is not. The other one is very specific problem that women have when they have to.
Yeah.
So
let's just talk about the story. What am I trying to say? The storyline of The Idiot.
So the Idiot is a Bildung romance. So it's it's this coming to age story of this girl who is from this migrant family. So it's she's Turkish American first generation who goes to Harvard, which is an incredible university, to study comparative literature when she's 19 and is covering the first year of university. So she's Celine is my new idol. I completely identify with her. She's
amazing,
super nerdy.
So
she goes, she's the protagonist, and she kind of she's bumping into all these theories and she's taking all these different classes. So every time in the book you get a tiny bit of she's reading Noam Chomsky or she's reading Kierkegaard, and she's getting these tiny bits of pieces from this stuff and from her everyday life and from the people that she's meeting and trying to understand her place in the world. And in a way that is, I think is really interesting and radical, because she's talking a lot about, she gets into this idea, or she's interested in this idea about the aesthetic life and the ethic life in the book, and how, what does it mean to be a woman and make those choices? And she's really aware through all the books saying I don't want to have, this idea of having a romance and having children and that's going to happen is which would be the ethic idea for women. And she has friends, and she has this parallel story that goes through the book, kind of sell it to women. And she's all the time comparing herself to that. And then on the other hand, there's this aesthetic life, which she also says was the place for women, in that if women are usually kind of the object of
Yeah.
desire for like the
Yeah,
subjects that have the aesthetic life. So she also doesn't want to have that, and she's a bit like, what the fuck is my position in the world?
So Selin is the character, and then Elif Bautman is the author, and it's not autobiographical, but it's like something like a kind of fictionalized version of herself as the character or something. But she said that I'm going to get this wrong. Maybe you can correct me, but she wrote this novel like not that long after she'd been in college. So she wrote it in maybe her mid-20s, and then she did lots of other writing, and it was never published. Sorry, and then she came back to the manuscript and kind of reworked it. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's a step before that, and
Okay,
that's what I swear I heard this, and I could not find it. I think I heard it in a podcast, in an interview, but and that's why I decided to read the novel, because I'm quite interested in autobiography and the kind of whole trend in autofiction. And what she said is she wrote this as a diary. Well, this was she wrote a diary about her first year in Harvard, because she went to Harvard and she studied comparative literature. And then when she was 23, she wrote this novel, which she said was really bad. And then when in her mid-30s, she's writing another novel, which she hasn't published yet. And as she was writing, she realized that Celine was sort of this character. So she went back and rewrote. So it was really interesting, because now she's writing the novel, which is the continuation of this novel, which she wrote in between the two versions of the novel.
Oh, okay, amazing. Right, yeah.
So I just thought it was a really weird way of constructing these stories together.
Yeah.
And I think to me, and again, I couldn't double check it, but it makes total sense that there's a diary for this book.
Yeah.
Because the level of like detail, that they're so pointless, but they're also completely perfect for what they are. It's just, they make so much sense.
Yeah.
But I was just finding it really hard. It just captured a certain type of feeling that you have when you're 19 and you're encountering all this stuff.
My feeling of reading the book is so wrapped up in my maybe assumptions, but like my kind of hypotheses about how she has written the book, because there's so much like, what's the word? The narrator is so self-aware, but also she is so like young and an idiot. Like the title of the book is The Idiot, and that's kind of like the main character is meant to be like necessarily an idiot because she's 19, like how everyone's an idiot at 19. And there's really amazing moments where she's just got this massive amount of self-awareness about how she doesn't have any opinions. Do you remember that bit?
I love that. That's one of my
bit.
favorite things.
She's like, hang on, I'll find the note because it's really good. She's talking about her friend Svetlana, who is has it together or something.
Yeah,
It
and
seems
she
to her more.
Svetlana wants to live the ethical life. They have like this discussion, I think, 4 times in the book, because she's the first person who tells Celine, you want to live an aesthetic life, well, I want to live an ethical life, which for Svetlana means to have, find a good relationship with like a nice partner and stuff. And
So the quote is, "It was a mystery to me how Svetlana generated so many opinions. Any piece of information seemed to produce an opinion on contact. Meanwhile, I went from class to class, read hundreds, thousands of pages of the distilled ideas of the great things of human history, and nothing happened." Which is like such a good description of like when you first get to uni, isn't it? Like you're taking all this stuff on board and you're still a fucking moron. Like you still can't do anything right. There's all these things about clothing at the start of the book where she arrives in Boston and like her coat is stolen because her flatmate leaves the door open, and then she buys this like big, massive, shapeless overcoat and just wears it throughout the rest of the book in like different inappropriate situations in which people are drawn to comment on how like horrible the coat is. It's really good. I really like it. But there's also this disconnect. You can just tell that there's also a lot of gentleness between the Elif Bautman writing it and writing about the character. So she's not blaming Celine or the character for like, she's just like looking back with quite affection on like, I guess the freedom that kind of state gives you, or I don't know what.
But I think there's a lot of like affection from Bautman, like that. Although Celine comes really, she's like debating all these options, she's still taking these stands that are quite. I don't know if courageous is the word in a sense, but she does these things like, I remember there's this moment when she's like walking with Svetlana, and then this guy from one of her classes comes and say hi to her, and Celine doesn't reply, and the guy just walks with her for like 4 minutes and then he leaves. And Svetlana says like, why didn't you say anything? And Celine says, I couldn't think of anything to say. And then Svetlana was like, well, it's because you obsessed with you think you need to say something intelligent or smart or make sense. And Celine is like, yeah, like why wouldn't I say something if I don't? And I think the opinion thing is the same. There's like this Celine spends all the book kind of like feeling that she knows there's all these things are expected of her. And that's what I think is really interesting as a coming of age, because a coming of age romance novel in theory is like how someone learns how to be part of society. And Celine just spends the whole book saying like, nah.
Doing it really well.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't know. How can I be part of society? And I think it's just really exciting to have a female character. Literary novels are not plot driven. So this is a spoiler, but she goes to the end of the novel and she's still not part of society. Like she's not, there's not like a happy ending. It's just life goes on. And there's also no like, I don't think there's like a life change. She's not a transformed character that now she has opinions because she has learned all this stuff. She's like understanding something much more basic about being in
I
the
think
world.
that's, for me, it's a literary novel, I say, so it's not plot driven, but I think that's also why it falls under the category of auto-fiction, even though it's a bit different, because you're meant to feel like it's been a much more accurate portrayal of change, or at least that's what I like about fiction that is kind of autobiographical or based on a closeness to life.
I think Bautman has spoken about, is this a novel or not a novel? And she's not interested in that question. But I had this expectation, especially when she goes in the trip, that something is going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting that the texture of the trip is very similar to the texture of the university.
Did you listen to the long form interview? So in that interview, she actually comes back around on that question and says that she is really interested in the idea of fiction and non-fiction, and that there is a difference. She says, like, this is The Idiot is a novel.
No, it's just because there are two different questions. Like, one is a fiction non-fiction, and the other one is the novel as a format.
Oh, I see. Sorry, yeah.
Because I think when she does so this is a podcast that we listened a few weeks ago, which is really good, the long read podcast. And long form, sorry. And she's talking about, she's reading, while she's doing the podcast, she's in the middle of reading, I think, Eduardo Galeano's, which is this Latin American theorist who writes about colonialism. And Galeano, I haven't read this Galeano's book. He's talking about how the novel is like this colonial form, and what does that mean in terms of what the novel is. And I think she's talking about that she maybe like unconsciously is not following many of the rules of what a novel is, and that people have like asked her, is it a novel? Is this which I think is a question that people would do to like a lot of autofiction. Like I think you could definitely do that to Nasgard, who I've heard said he thinks the 6 books are one novel. Like the novel is the 6 books of my struggle, or like Rachel Cusk, which I don't even know if she calls that. She calls them novels, but
part of the interesting interplay between character and writer in The Idiot is that the character wouldn't exist if the writer hadn't been close enough to the character to be bullheaded and adolescent and naive enough to have written a diary while she was at university, and then to at the end of that university, even in the novel, that thing of like her realizing that this like awkwardness or idiocy or whatever you want to call it of herself is actually like an advantage or a tool that she can use. Because
of the way the form is usually used, when she went in the trip, I was like, we're doomed now.
Oh, I see.
Because now the guy is there, she's there, they're together for like a month, and then she just goes to do her own stuff, which I think is amazing.
But she does the same kind of stuff. She like sits in the car or like just doesn't turn up and meet him even though they've arranged to meet or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
And I just, and again, like, I started rereading it for the podcast, and I didn't realize that the first time, but there's this incredible story that Bautman puts in the book, which is this romance that they have to read for the Russian lesson.
So she's learning Russian, and they give her like a basic text which only uses the grammar that they've learned up until now. And so there's not even chapters in this, but like every now and again you get like a new portion of this story.
And this is like a romance between, I don't remember the name.
A graduate student and another graduate
student. And then the protagonist of the of this second story. It's also called Ivan.
Yes, he is. Yeah,
And
that's right.
but this is like a very traditional story, and it's like not. It's completely plot driven because it's for the class. So it's basically this like drama where this woman is in love with Ivan. Ivan left. She doesn't know why. She follows him. In the end, he has married someone else. But then, because she has followed him, she met this other guy, and then she get married, and then it's fine.
Oh, and she's really unsatisfied with that, isn't she, Celine?
Yeah. And she spent the whole novel comparing it. But at the same time, she, quite a few times in the book, compares her feelings to her Ivan, to the feelings in this other plot-driven story. And what I think is interesting is that, rereading the book, she totally makes herself fall in love with
the real Ivan.
With the real Ivan, because she's like reading these love stories, and she's like, that's what you do when you're in college. That's what you do in life. You need to find these people and fall in love. So she finds this guy and she falls in love, and he sort of becomes the engine of a lot of her decisions. But he's always an engine in this really sideways, which I think is really interesting. So like, she does the trip because of him, because he's going to be there for a month.
Yes, that's right, isn't it?
And he cannot be with her because he has a girlfriend, but he's always, he's a very confusing character. So he's always like flirting with her and telling her that actually he loves her, but he can't be with her. So she goes to this trip because of him. But then she just like uses that as a reason to do other stuff, because she's not choosing between the ethical life and the aesthetic life. She's choosing something in between. She's choosing something where like, I can still have these relations and desires and love and other people, but I can still also enjoy just pleasure and present and all these other feelings and kind of navigate on my own, and I don't have to give up anything, which I think for a 19-year-old woman is pretty awesome to
I wonder whether that's the interesting I mean, that's one of the many interesting things about that, but about this book, but like, it is like, it's pretty standard. Knausgaard, it's just because you mentioned him, like, it's pretty standard to get these like hopeless, intelligent but confused, awkward males as like the beginning of the story, and as like a young man to like be identifying with them quite strongly. And I guess maybe this is just like the first really good thing that I've read in which that person is a woman, and what that means to be that like awkward, beta, super intelligent young person is totally different as a woman, isn't it? It's like a different set of obstructions and a different set of norms that are like being kind of pushed away. Yeah,
I was really interested about that because I think you were the first person I sent when I really got into the book, and I sent you a text and I was like, you should read this. This is actually amazing. And then I went to meet you and I already had this defensive thing where it's just like, Matt's gonna tell me, why did you tell me to read this book? And I was really prepared to fight for it. And then I met you and you were like, I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, of course.
This is really good.
This is, just to be clear, like, this is exactly the kind of book that I love, like, to a T.
Well, I'm just used to thinking that, men don't read books about protagonists like that, because maybe that's the thing that I was projecting in my head, that I shouldn't read books. Like, I was curious because I was so self-aware that this book protagonist was a 19-year-old woman. Yeah. And that was so different because we have read Knausgaard together, we have read Rachel Cusk together, we have read like quite a lot of things together, but they have always been protagonists that, I don't know, are kind of like serious.
Well, I think Rachel Cusk is a bit different. Well, maybe we can talk about her in another podcast, but Rachel Cusk's writing is like brutal. She's like brilliant, but very different. Like Knausgaard, I think, is similar in the sense that he presents like his younger self as like absolutely hopeless, and yet we know that he then has success, some kind of like life that is meaningful later on, or even that idiocy of himself as a young man is like a meaningful idiocy. And I guess maybe this is just maybe it's just like cringy to be like, maybe you like identified in a more literal way with this character where you're like, oh, I literally was a 19-year-old woman at one point, whereas when you're reading Knausgaard you're like, oh, isn't it interesting, this idea of like a novel? Well, I don't know, like maybe it's more hypothetical, your identification with the character.
I don't know, it's funny, I just it felt like there was a lot of risk involved in recommending this book to people.
Interesting. So what are your other defenses against?
When I was doing my first MA in Brazil, I did research on self-portraiture and autobiographical works in art, and I've always been really interested not in the stuff like, because I would say that and people will say, you probably love Rembrandt and maybe Frida Kahlo. And I'd be like, it's not that. It's more like Nan Goldin. It's that, and these people that kind of using everyday life and they recognizing that it's part of their work. And I read lots of stuff about this idea of the autobiographical pact, which is the idea that it's not about fiction and non-fiction, but it's about reading something where the author is making sort of a pact of truth to you. And I think that was something that maybe I'm trying to articulate now because of the stuff I'm doing on facts and truth. But it's like the idea that a pact biographical is that when you read a book that has this kind of relation to life that is made quite clear for you, like Bautman makes that clear, Nasgard makes that clear, Kusk makes that clear. It's not like you read them and you think, oh, maybe this is referring to them. It's like this is like part of the whole culture around the book. Then you kind of establish this different way of reading it because you sort of allow yourself to believe that there's a connection to reality, and kind of the author takes the stand of like convincing you that there's a connection to reality. And there's something there that I cannot put my finger on, but I find really interesting. I just remember that the first thing I actually read from Bautman was this. She writes for The New Yorker, and she wrote this essay about a book that I really like called A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. And then she wrote it like 2 years. Like the book was a massive success a few years ago, and it's a weird book. It's also a very weird book. And she wrote it 2 years afterwards or something, which was really funny. And she started by saying like, oh yeah, I know this is a bit stupid because everybody has read the book by now. But actually, because the book has this extremely like melodramatic, and it like is about, you know, in a way it's about this life of these really affluent people. It's like so wrong in so many levels that she was like, all my friends keep telling me you have to read this book. And she would start and be like, I can't read this book. And then I felt, oh, that's okay, because I felt like that about your book as well.
Yeah.
I think I wrote this. Celine is always fascinating about how people know things, how they make decisions, how they hold opinions, and know in terms of like how it's not like an epistemology question. It's not like she's fascinated. How do, like, I don't know, doctors make decisions, but it's about how can people know they know something.
Yeah,
she's fascinated about like, and it's so obscure to her, and I think it goes to the end of the novel and she still doesn't know it, and she's like, yeah, how does all these other people exist in the world and like think they assume they know, or like come to this enlightenment where they feel I know stuff.
But that is, in a way, that is like a classic. Although it's an unspoken position to take in a lot of novels, a lot of protagonists are this kind of like soundboard, for, especially comic novels. They're like a sounding board for other people's like humorously written, received opinions that are meaningless. Do you know what I mean? And that does happen in this novel. Although there are, I think what's interesting about it is she voices that like thing, and it's not like, oh, that's a stupid opinion. It's just like, wow, it's so crazy that they've decided that not only they know something, but they know it enough to express it out loud. But that almost like gives it too much moral judgment. To her, it's like just really fascinating that like people have decided to express things.
Yeah, but also not only to express, but to like decide. She just lets things happen to her. So like she goes on a trip because the trip happens, and then this other person says you should go and do this, and then she just when she's on her trip, she's staying with these families, and these families are just taking her to do things, and she's just floating, and you don't really understand why she doesn't like a lot of these people, or she doesn't necessarily feel she wants to do them, but she also doesn't know when to do them.
The only time she gets a day off, she just spends she's in the middle of Paris, and she spends the whole day just like eating cookies and reading like Russian novels or something, like without leaving the house. Maybe that's what I was trying to get with earlier, like the character doesn't express that explicitly, but we know, because if you know anything about the writing of this novel, then you know like that the narrator, even at the time, was recording things because she thought they were worthwhile, which is a form of like adolescence that I think a certain kind of artists need to maintain, that adolescence throughout their life, in the sense that I believe that my life, no matter how banal, is like worth recording in some way.
Just I'm thinking, because I'm really into autofiction, but I'm also really into mumblecore, which I think is a very similar thing. You're laughing, but mumblecore.
Define, just like for our listeners, define mumblecore.
So mumblecore It's mainly an American type of film, independent film in the early noughties, I would say. They're films that were done by film students, just with like cameras, super cheap. Usually they will be done like in a weekend or in a week. And the actors and the director is just a group of friends that kind of write the script together. And they're called mumblecore because people just mumble through the whole films. They're just lots of people talking and not a lot happen. And it's usually about like really tiny things. So it would be like a group of friends or a party, and then a friend sort of try to kiss another friend. There's never like big actions. There's like tiny things. And it would just follow, it might be follow the people over the weekend, seeing like how this tiny bit of tension that might have slightly changed the way the group of people relate to each other affects their relationship. But it's like, it's just every day. So it would be like people cooking, and then they kind of spend time together, and then they go to a bar, and then the film ends. And like usually nothing changes. And a lot of people dislike them because they say they feel like watching films made by MA students, which I think is a great critique. Why wouldn't you want to watch films made by MA students? Those are like amazing films that have lots of weird stuff on them. And a lot of these directors now are becoming Hollywood directors. And Greta Gerwig, for example, which started mumblecore films now, is also a director.
She directed Lady Bird.
Yeah,
which was nominated for an Oscar.
Which is not a mumblecore film. It's
it's not.
Very plot-driven.
It's exactly what a mumblecore film would be if you were given loads of money and forced to give it a plot, I think.
Yeah, that is sad.
Yeah, it's sad.
To me, there might be some of the most interesting films about like female sexuality, because women do amazing things in mumblecore films, and because they are writing their own parts. So, and you get like older women. They just do
quite realistic things, don't they? Rather than appearing as objects of desire.
Yeah.
The one I'm thinking of is Hannah Takes the Stairs.
Yes.
Hannah's the main character.
Yes.
And she's like, and is that Greta Gerwig?
Yeah. And she co-wrote it.
She co-wrote, and she's just a bit of a dickhead. Like
she's a total dickhead.
She's like, she just keeps like turning up at people's houses and like ruining their day, basically.
It's really funny, and like so in Hannah Takes the Stairs, she. Greta Gerwig's character goes through like 4 boyfriends and 3 boyfriends, and they're all really important mumblecore directors, which is also really funny because all the directors are actors.
Yeah, sure.
So they're also, this is a group of 30 people, so they're all like in everybody's films, and she will fall in love with someone, and it's she like all these little things she does to kind of like seduce him, or like paying attention and thinking, oh my God, this guy is like so amazing and he's so interesting. And then very quickly after like spending some real time with that person, she's like, oh my God, this person is such a pain. And then while she's with that person, she starts flirting with someone else. And then she finds, and so she's like moving from one boyfriend to the other in a way that is also not, it's not destructive. It's just how life is. It's not like this horrible woman who goes and like seduces and ruins people's lives and move on. It's like, that's how desire works. You want to be with someone, and then you sort of like change your mind, and you want to be with someone else, and that person moves on. I don't know. It's like
what you were saying about the critique of mumblecore would apply to a lot of autofiction as well, which is like, it's essentially you're reading about privilege, because to have published a novel about your bullshit, like young, I mean, it particularly applies to this novel, The Idiot, and also to Knausgaard, right? It's like people's dismissal of it is like, you're just a published author who's just been offered the chance to publish any old shit. And the same with mumblecore is like, you just believe that your like bullshit privilege life is like worth recording and documenting, and I am like taking a stand against that.
Yeah, and I think that critique is always problematic, because I think that use of privilege is problematic. To use privilege because that's a calling out use of privilege. Okay. When you're not pointing to privilege in a way that kind of like challenges any structure or like really questions your position. Like those critiques, to say like mumblecore are done by privileged people is, or
it's just true.
This, it's just truth. It's just truth, but it's how can I say? It's a fact.
Yeah.
I have to say, I think all the mumblecore films I've seen, for example, are like white people.
Yeah, sure.
For example,
yeah.
But there's an amazing mumblecore film. I don't remember the name. Where the protagonist is a girl who's in a wheelchair, and it's an amazing film because she's just a friend and she's a co-writer, and like the wheelchair is just a thing. Like it's not a film about disability.
Yeah.
And I remember watching that. I think like, wow, I never watched actually something like that, and I read lots of different stuff and I watch lots of different stuff, and I'm quite aware, and I make an extra effort, because these things can be hard to access, to watch a lot of Black cinema, to watch a lot of queer cinema, to see the indie stuff that is happening on the other sides, and to read novels that are written by lots of different people. And sometimes I feel the people that do the call of privilege actually don't do the work, and they're not watching any of that stuff. They're not like supporting any of the other scenes. They're just saying, look, I can see this. And it's
but we can all see it.
We can all see it, but what's your point?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, like recently I decided to, well, I didn't really decide to, I just really wanted to read some, oh shit, I can't remember, guys. I can't remember the fucking name. Sorry, I'll have to Google this, because otherwise. Sell Out. Yeah, I decided to read The Sellout by Paul Beatty, and then read White Boy Shuffle as well. He's a Black American writer, and he's very much like writing from a perspective that it's like a very unliberal book, unpolitically correct, and like doesn't really go out of its way to like appease any kind of liberal sensibilities for the white readership, although I'm sure there are many white readers, and I was one of them. And what I realised, and this is so fucking obvious, but like, oh right, this is just the sort of literary fiction that I like anyway. By reading his fiction, I was doing nothing to like challenge any kind of structure that stops different voices being heard. Do you know what I mean? Because he was writing in a way that was like just exactly the sort of writing that I already like.
But I do think that makes something. I do think that it changes things in terms of race. Just because when you think about literary novelist writer, you think of a white man.
Yeah, okay.
And just the fact that we can slowly start like shifting that, and maybe it will be a question mark at some point, and you'd be like, oh, I don't know what, when I think about this and I make a choice of what to read, that I don't have these assumptions that, this sort of person, write this sort of thing. Or I was just talking to a student yesterday who is trans, and he was saying it's really hard because as an artist, you're expected to do things about being trans, and you don't necessarily want to do this. Like, I'm Latin America, and I'm a mother, and I'm a woman, and I do stuff that it's not that I can leave that identity behind, but I also do stuff that doesn't have to talk about these things. You know what I mean? And I want to be, when I talk about getting into a fight with you about object-oriented ontology, we're fighting as like equals, and you're not going to be like, oh, Andrea can only understand ontology through race or whatever. Although I probably will have a fight.
but it's tricky, isn't it? Because like on the one hand, like I'm thinking about like mine and your conversations. On the one hand, like I don't think these are actually in opposition. So we talk as equals, obviously, and maybe sometimes you a little bit higher than me. but also on the other hand, like the way that you will say something like, like when we're talking about ontology, because you were kind of uninterested in ontology for a long time, but then the way you became interested in it was like through race and a kind of queer phenomenology, and then like entered into discussions of ontology, which is like not the way that I got into it, but is now the way that I'm really interested in. Do you know what I mean? So it's tricky, because when you say like you shouldn't be expected to present your identity as part of your creative output, I think that's true. But I also just think like partly it's only because like people still believe that whatever the obvious example, like young white male middle class artists aren't presenting their young white male middle classness through the work, but they are. Like we always are. Like and the only difference is whether you're going to explicitly recognize that, which you shouldn't be forced to do. And I guess that's the point about your student, is that they shouldn't be constantly forced to be like, by the way, this is like informed by my experience as a trans person. Because you just shouldn't be made to like reveal yourself as the author of a work in any particular way unless you want to do that.
I think you're completely right in everything you said, and I think maybe I phrased this wrong. I think it's not that I can exit that identity, or that even one exit that identity. It's more that you get categorized. So if I think for quite a lot of people or institutions, if I ever wanted to do something about ontology, it will have to be in a Latin American studies department, for example.
Yeah.
So it's about being excluded from like these conversations. So to think, for example, that you can do a novel being of, gender and gender, race, and you're not going to go to like only to like feminist bookshops or like to, Black publishers. You can have that identity. I mean, you can have it's your identity, or like you are who you are, and then you write from that position, but that you're not excluded then to a niche of like where people do things for queer people, or like and I think it's getting better, but it is quite hard. I'm still impressed how hard it is a lot of times to access certain types of culture that are produced by certain types of people.
The classic example is like Elena Ferrante's books, right? Like these like 4 Neapolitan novels that were probably the biggest literary smash for years and years and years. But the front covers of all of the books are like chick lit. Even though the publisher already knew by the time they were publishing them that they were like going to be huge literary smashes, and they could have just put them in a fucking blank cover and they would have sold, because they weren't selling on the basis of their cover. They were selling on the basis of huge amounts of reviews and bestsellers lists in the New York Times, blah, blah, blah. All the covers are like women half turned away, or like little girls on... They just look like holiday romance books, don't they? It's absolutely crazy.
I don't know if this is pointless, but just because you brought Ferrante, and I had a note about Ferrante, which on my justifications about why they did, which was that when we were reading Ferrante and Asgard at the same time, both of us, and I think we always had these discussions, or like I always have this argument that Asgard, in Asgard books, his protagonist, which is himself, is like constituted on its own. Like he's a subject who goes through the world. And in Ferrante's novels, and that's also in her novellas, like the women, it doesn't matter how smart they are, how successful, they're always constituted by the men around them. So they always need this kind of men who kind of like lock into them, and it can be in opposition to them, but it's always through their eyes and through their judgment that they understand themselves as full human beings. And I think she does it perfectly well, because I think that's also reflects a lot of women's experience in the world, I would say. But Celine's character, she's not constructed through men.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's really exciting. She's like not at all, and it's not like she doesn't like become queer in the novel, or she's attracted to men. Yeah. She's has these feelings, but she doesn't. She has her own life, and these relationships just come and go, just as maybe Asgard's book do for him, in a sense. And I thought that was a really different way of constructing female subjectivity that, again, got me really excited, even though that was not my experience being a 19-year-old. I was like, I wish I was like that when I was a 19-year-old. Like, every teenage girl should read this book.
Thanks so much to Andrea. Thanks for listening. The next podcast with Andrea will be our last, and then we'll have some more guests for you. Okay, cheers.